On July 8, at 2:23 p.m., a tragic incident occurred involving an employee working for a utilities construction company. The worker was tasked with inspecting a water main valve inside an underground vault, a confined space that required careful atmospheric monitoring. During the inspection, the employee unexpectedly lost consciousness and collapsed inside the vault. Due to a critically low oxygen level in the confined space, the worker asphyxiated before anyone could provide emergency medical assistance. Following the incident, OSHA conducted a thorough investigation, uncovering multiple safety violations, each underscoring essential requirements for confined space safety. These violations illustrated gaps in the company's approach to confined space entry, specifically in the areas of hazard evaluation, ventilation, and training. OSHA requires employers to designate a competent person capable of identifying and assessing all confined spaces in the workplace. In this case, the employer had not assigned anyone to evaluate and monitor the underground vault, a critical omission. This lapse meant that confined space hazards like low oxygen levels were not identified or addressed prior to entry, leading to a preventable tragedy. The employer also had not conducted atmospheric testing for oxygen levels, toxic gases, or other potential hazards before allowing the worker to enter the vault. OSHA requires thorough pre-entry testing to confirm the safety of confined spaces. The lack of testing meant that the dangerously low oxygen levels went undetected, putting the employee at fatal risk. Additionally, the employer allowed the worker to enter the vault even though the oxygen levels measured between 12 and 16%, far below the safe minimum of 19.5%. OSHA prohibits entry into confined spaces with oxygen-deficient atmospheres without adequate respiratory protection. Allowing the employee to enter under these conditions exposed them to severe respiratory hazards and ultimately led to their death. Entering the vault's hazardous atmosphere safely would have required continuous forced air ventilation, which the employer failed to provide. According to OSHA's safety standards, employers must ensure sufficient ventilation to maintain safe air quality levels in confined spaces with known atmospheric hazards. Without ventilation, the oxygen-poor environment within the vault became lethal. OSHA found that the employer had not provided adequate confined space safety training. Under federal law, all employees entering confined spaces must receive training to understand the specific hazards and how to mitigate them. This training is essential for recognizing risks, ensuring the correct safety measures, and making informed decisions. The absence of this training left the employee unprepared and unaware of the dangers within the vault. Lastly, according to OSHA, employers must report any workplace fatality to OSHA within 8 hours. In this case, the employer failed to meet this requirement, delaying the notification and obstructing OSHA's timely response and investigation. This tragic case underscores the critical role of OSHA's confined space safety requirements in preventing workplace fatalities. Employers must ensure that all confined spaces are identified, thoroughly evaluated, and continuously monitored. Effective atmospheric testing, appropriate ventilation, and robust training are all essential to protect employees working in potentially hazardous environments. Additionally, prompt reporting of incidents is crucial for compliance and accountability. On July 29, at 9:25 a.m., 2 employees at a landscaping company were preparing to begin a hydroseeding project on a high school football field. The team was using a hydroseeding truck, which included a large tank designed to mix and spray seed, water, and fertilizers. Before starting, one worker opened the tank hatch to visually inspect the auger system for any clogs. While doing so, the worker lost their footing, slipped, and fell into the tank, where they were quickly overcome by fertilizer fumes accumulating inside the enclosed space. Another employee heard the worker's cry for help, immediately climbed to the top of the vehicle, and entered the tank to rescue the trapped worker. Tragically, the second employee was also quickly overwhelmed by the vapors. Both workers died of asphyxiation from the hazardous atmosphere inside the tank. After the incident, OSHA conducted an investigation and issued a citation to the employer for a serious safety violation, highlighting the need for proper hazard assessment and respiratory protection in confined spaces. OSHA's investigation revealed that the employer had not identified or evaluated the respiratory hazards associated with the hydroseeding tank. Federal OSHA safety standards require employers to assess potential respiratory hazards and provide adequate protection to workers, especially in confined spaces where hazardous atmospheres may accumulate. The employer's failure to recognize the tank as a confined space and evaluate the risks of deadly fumes led directly to the tragic loss of both workers. The absence of a confined space assessment meant that the employees entered an enclosed area with potentially toxic and oxygen-depleted air without any respiratory protection or monitoring equipment to warn them of dangerous gas levels. The employer's failure to provide adequate protective measures, such as atmospheric testing, ventilation, or respiratory protection, exposed both employees to fatal respiratory hazards. This incident highlights the critical importance of confined space hazard evaluations, especially in tanks and enclosed areas where vapors or fumes can collect. Employers must carefully assess confined spaces, test for hazardous atmospheres, and provide appropriate respiratory protection and rescue protocols to prevent tragedies. OSHA standards for confined space entry exist to protect workers from unforeseen hazards, and strict adherence is essential to maintaining a safe work environment. On the morning of July 7, a construction crew working for a water and sewer line company was involved in an incident that tragically highlighted the importance of OSHA's confined space safety protocols. At around 11 a.m., workers were attempting to remove a 24-inch rubber plug from a sewer pipe located within a 24-foot deep wet well. The crew first attempted to pull the plug using an attached nylon rope, but due to pressure caused by wastewater entering the well, the plug was wedged tightly into a T-shaped fitting. Without performing any atmospheric testing, one employee climbed down into the well with a crowbar to manually dislodge the plug, unaware of potentially hazardous gases that could be present. After struggling to remove the plug, the employee attempted to climb back up the ladder just 2 feet from the surface. However, the worker lost consciousness and fell back into the well. Recognizing the emergency, a second employee descended the ladder to help but also lost consciousness upon entering the space. A third employee also attempted a rescue, but this worker lost consciousness as well. All 3 workers tragically died due to asphyxiation from hydrogen sulfide gas, which had accumulated in the confined space. OSHA's investigation into the incident uncovered multiple serious safety violations, many of which underscored the importance of adhering to confined space entry protocols designed to protect workers from atmospheric and physical hazards. The employer failed to designate a competent person to identify, evaluate, and test confined spaces on site. A competent person could have recognized the permit-required confined space, assessed potential hazards, and ensured that it was safe before allowing workers to enter. OSHA also found that the employer did not evaluate potential hazards within the confined space before allowing workers to enter. Had this evaluation been conducted, the employer might have identified the potential presence of hydrogen sulfide gas and other atmospheric hazards in the wet well. Additionally, the wet well's opening, measuring nearly 8 feet by 6 feet, was left unguarded, exposing workers to a serious fall risk. OSHA fall protection standards require employers to secure confined space openings with guardrails or temporary barriers to prevent such falls. Under federal law, employers must test for breathable oxygen levels, flammable gases, and potential toxic contaminants before allowing employees to enter a confined space. However, in this case, the employer failed to conduct any such testing. As a result, the workers were exposed to lethal levels of hydrogen sulfide gas without any warning. OSHA also requires employers to purge, inert, flush, or vent confined spaces to remove or control atmospheric hazards. No such measures were taken to address the presence of hydrogen sulfide, contributing directly to the workers' exposure to lethal concentrations of the gas in the well's hazardous atmosphere. Employers must also ensure that emergency rescue equipment is readily available when employees are working in confined spaces. OSHA found that the company failed to have any such equipment on hand, violating federal safety requirements. Without this equipment, the workers' colleagues could not effectively attempt a safe rescue. OSHA also requires employers to develop written protocols for emergency rescue, medical treatment, and protection from unauthorized rescue attempts. In this case, no such protocols were in place, leading to an unplanned rescue attempt by untrained personnel, which ultimately resulted in further needless fatalities. Importantly, an entry permit detailing compliance with OSHA's confined space requirements should have been prepared before entry. The lack of a documented permit violated federal OSHA safety standards and underscored the absence of systematic hazard identification and control. The employer also failed to provide the necessary confined space safety training to help workers understand the risks and proper protocols associated with entering confined spaces. Without this training, employees remained unaware of the hazards of confined space entry and the measures necessary to mitigate them. Finally, OSHA cited the employer for failing to provide training specific to each worker's role in confined space entry, including the responsibilities of entrants, attendants, and supervisors. This lack of role-specific training left employees ill-prepared to safely manage confined space work or respond effectively in an emergency. This tragic case serves as a critical reminder of the essential nature of OSHA's confined space safety requirements in the construction industry. Proper planning, atmospheric testing, effective training, and the use of rescue equipment are vital to preventing fatal incidents in confined spaces. Employers must take these precautions seriously to protect their workers and avoid preventable tragedies like this one. On the afternoon of November 25, at around 1:30 p.m., a construction worker was performing routine tasks on the 7th floor of a high-rise building under construction. The worker was assigned to spray water onto concrete columns beneath the temporary framework built to support a substantial concrete pour on that floor. Tragically, the poured concrete weighed significantly more than the shoring system could handle. Without warning, the framework buckled under the weight, and the 7th floor collapsed, sending tons of wet concrete down onto the employee below, who was immediately and fatally crushed. Following the incident, OSHA conducted a thorough investigation and identified multiple safety violations. The findings underscored the critical importance of adhering to OSHA's standards for concrete and masonry work. OSHA cited the employer for a serious violation related to the inadequate review of the shoring plans provided by the engineering firms. The initial plans, as well as subsequent revisions, had failed to account for the additional load imposed by a thicker 24-inch concrete slab. OSHA regulations stipulate that all concrete formwork must be designed, erected, supported, and maintained to withstand any reasonably expected vertical or lateral loads. Unfortunately, the formwork in this case was not built to endure the actual weight of the poured concrete, resulting in a fatal structural failure. In addition to the failure in load-bearing design, OSHA noted an other than serious violation concerning inadequate training. The employer had permitted employees to erect formwork for cast-in-place concrete without providing the necessary instructions on safe procedures and regulatory requirements. Under federal law, employers must ensure that workers receive proper training to recognize and avoid hazards. The lack of instruction put workers at increased risk during formwork operations, leaving them unprepared to handle potential safety hazards effectively. This tragic case highlights the absolute necessity for compliance with OSHA's safety regulations in the construction industry, especially for concrete and masonry work. Proper adherence to formwork standards, combined with robust training, is essential to safeguard workers' lives and prevent avoidable accidents. On March 13 at 9:15 a.m., a tragic incident unfolded on a job site where a construction worker was using a 40-ton capacity overhead crane to move a 6,800-pound precast concrete slab. The slab was attached to the crane by two lifting studs embedded in the concrete, with lifting eyes secured by double nuts. However, as the employee maneuvered the crane, a two-chain hoisting sling accidentally snagged on a metal gusset on the slab, causing slack in the sling. This caused the slab to roll off its A-frame stand unexpectedly and tip over onto the employee. The worker died from the resulting internal trauma, broken bones, and severe head injuries. During their subsequent investigation of the incident, OSHA identified several violations that contributed to this worker's death, emphasizing the importance of safety standards to prevent such tragedies. OSHA issued a serious citation for the employer's failure to provide safe access to working areas. The employer had placed an extension ladder against a wall next to the concrete panel, obstructing the walkway between the acid wash area and other parts of the site. This setup left workers with a blocked path, creating a hazard in case of an emergency. Under federal OSHA standards, employers must maintain clear egress routes to ensure worker safety when moving to and from work areas. A second serious violation involved inadequate precautions in handling the crane's two-chain sling. OSHA's investigation revealed that the employer did not ensure the sling was properly cleared of obstacles during use. As the crane hoist lifted the slab, the chain sling snagged on a metal gusset embedded in the slab, causing the concrete panel to flip off its support and fall. This exposed employees to severe crushing hazards, a clear violation of OSHA safety standards, which require employers to prevent slings from catching on obstacles and posing potential dangers to workers and pedestrians. OSHA also cited the employer for an other than serious violation regarding inadequate training for crane operators. Specifically, the crane operator had not received instruction on the proper storage of radio remote controls, increasing the risk of accidental crane activation when the operator was not facing the equipment. This tragic incident highlights the fact that working with concrete is always dangerous and is often connected to many seemingly unrelated topics like crane safety, proper access and egress, and effective training for employees. The importance of clearing walkways, securing rigging from obstacles, and providing thorough training on how to operate equipment safely cannot be overstated, as these measures are vital in safeguarding lives on the job site. On shortly before noon on October 19, a worker at a concrete block and brick manufacturing company was tragically injured while cleaning a concrete mixer. While performing routine maintenance inside the barrel of the mixer, the worker was struck unexpectedly by a metal bar, causing a fatal skull fracture. OSHA's investigation revealed multiple safety violations, highlighting critical lapses in hazard control measures and safety protocols. After examining the site, OSHA issued several citations, emphasizing the importance of proper machinery safety procedures, lockout/tagout practices, and electrical safety requirements. Under the General Duty Clause of the OSHA Act, federal OSHA requires employers to maintain a safe workplace free from recognized hazards. In this case, OSHA cited the employer for failing to ensure safe equipment use. The mixer's hood, weighing nearly 100 pounds, was lifted and held open by a hook that lacked a safety latch. Although the hook was designed to prevent accidental load slips, it was not properly secured, increasing the risk of hazardous movements during cleaning. Another serious violation involved the absence of lockout/tagout procedures to prevent the mixer from re-energizing during cleaning. OSHA requires employers to implement lockout/tagout devices to control hazardous energy. However, in this case the employer allowed workers to clean the mixer without first placing its energy isolation device in a de-energized state and securing it with a lockout or tagout device. This lapse in judgment exposed employees to dangerous caught-in or crushed-by hazards from unanticipated machine movement. OSHA also noted a serious violation involving electrical safety. The mixer was connected to a 110-volt electrical box with an unused opening. OSHA's electrical safety standards require that all unused electrical openings be properly closed to prevent contact with live electrical components. The failure to seal this opening created a risk of electrical shock or burns for employees working around the mixer. This incident underscores the critical importance of compliance with OSHA's safety standards in preventing workplace fatalities. Employers must ensure that machinery is secured with lockout/tagout devices during maintenance and that equipment such as hooks and electrical boxes meet safety standards. Attention to these requirements can significantly reduce hazardous exposures and protect employees from preventable injuries and fatalities. On September 4 at 3 p.m., an employee at a salvage yard was conducting routine defueling of vehicle gasoline tanks when disaster struck. Flammable gasoline vapors from the defueling area collected near the ground surface, where torch cutting operations were taking place nearby. The sparks from the torch ignited the vapors, resulting in a sudden explosion that tragically claimed the worker's life. OSHA's investigation of the incident identified several federal safety violations, underscoring critical gaps in the employer's fire protection measures. First, OSHA requires all fire hazards to be removed from areas where work like torch cutting may generate sparks. In this case, the employer failed to ensure the work area was free from such hazards, exposing employees to a highly combustible environment. OSHA also found that the employer allowed torch cutting in an area where gasoline vapors were present, a clear violation of safety standards for work performed near flammable vapors. This decision greatly increased the likelihood of ignition and highlighted the employer's lack of adequate safety planning. The investigation also revealed that the employer had not relocated combustible materials to a safe distance of at least 35 feet from the work site. Instead, the worker who died had been defueling vehicle gas tanks near torch cutting operations, creating an environment ripe for fire and explosion. Additionally, the employer's failure to conduct a thorough hazard assessment was another significant oversight. Employers must perform hazard assessments before authorizing any work involving fuel handling and work that may generate heat or sparks, yet in this case, no such assessment was conducted. Lastly, oxygen cylinders were being stored near highly combustible fuel gas cylinders, a proximity that heightens the risk of explosive reactions. This tragic incident underscores the vital importance of following OSHA's fire protection guidelines, especially in high-risk operations involving flammable materials. Regular hazard assessments, strict control of combustible materials, and safe storage of fuel sources are essential to preventing such devastating workplace accidents. On the afternoon of September 20th, a routine tank cleaning task at a pest control company became a tragic reminder of the importance of proper fire protection and emergency retrieval measures. At 2 p.m., an employee was tasked with draining residual brine water from an 8-foot deep, 10,000-gallon fiberglass tank previously used to store gasoline. However, after entering the tank, the worker began operating a power drill, which caused sparks that ignited lingering gasoline fumes. The explosion that followed completely engulfed the worker, fatally burning them. OSHA's investigation revealed that the incident stemmed from a series of critical oversights in fire protection and confined space safety protocols. Chief among these was the absence of a forced air ventilation system, which could have removed the hazardous fumes before work began. The employer also failed to perform the required atmospheric testing to confirm that the environment within the tank was safe to enter. Adequate fire protection in confined spaces is essential, particularly when flammable materials may be present. OSHA requires employers to take specific steps to eliminate fire hazards in such spaces, including purging, inerting, flushing, or ventilating, yet none of these were implemented. Nor did they provide continuous atmospheric monitoring to detect any dangerous changes in air quality. Furthermore, OSHA mandates that employers must use constant monitoring equipment when workers enter confined spaces with flammable substances, but the employer neglected this requirement as well. In addition, OSHA found that the employer had failed to ensure that a suitable mechanical device was in place for emergency retrieval in the event of a fire. Instead, the company relied on a synthetic rope, which is prohibited in potentially high-temperature environments because it may burn or fail under heat. Compounding these failures, the supervisor allowed the entry without verifying that all permit requirements for confined space entry had been met. This case illustrates the dangers of failing to adhere to OSHA's fire protection and confined space regulations, underscoring the importance of ventilation, monitoring, and emergency preparedness. On July 19 at 7:15 a.m., a routine operation at a manufacturing facility turned catastrophic. 3 employees were tasked with replacing an empty 55-gallon drum of paint reducer with a full one. As they moved the pump equipment from the empty drum to the new one, an unknown ignition source set off a flash fire, rapidly followed by an explosion fueled by the flammable vapors. The incident resulted in the hospitalization of 5 employees, severe burns for 3 of them, and the tragic loss of 2 lives. OSHA's investigation revealed that the employer's disregard for essential fire protection measures in handling flammable liquids contributed significantly to the accident. First, the facility stored nearly 550 gallons of Category 2, 3, and 4 flammable liquids, more than 4 times the legally permitted amount of 120 gallons. Proper storage limits on flammable materials reduced the risk of life-threatening fires. By exceeding them, the employer had set the stage for a disaster. Adding to the hazard, containers holding these flammable liquids were left open while workers performed other operations, allowing vapors to escape into the workspace. Compounding this issue, the employer failed to ensure that workers used non-sparking tools for removing and installing bungs and siphon connections on the barrels, a crucial precaution to prevent accidental ignition. OSHA also found that workers used polyurethane reducer for pump cleaning without bonding or grounding the equipment, a necessary step to avoid static buildup, which was a likely cause of this fire and subsequent explosion. Additionally, employees had not been trained in critical safety procedures for grounding and bonding or handling flammable liquids, leaving them unprepared for these dangers. This case illustrates the severe consequences of overlooking OSHA's fire protection requirements, particularly when handling flammable substances. Adhering to storage limits, using proper tools, and providing thorough safety training are essential steps to prevent such tragic incidents.